radio personality. Anybody know Tommy Mack? So we just don't have a chair up here for Tommy. And plus, he doesn't want to be seen with us. So introduce yourself, Tommy.
Oh, well, there's nothing much to introduce except I play that old trashy quartet music. People I run around with was Sumner and Gaither, and my boy sings with Gaither's vocal band. They're in California or somewhere. I don't know. I can't keep up with him. But Chief Engineer Tom Hill, if he turns, I don't know how to do a computer, guys. If he turns on the radio, I can say hello. And now, some lady told me, she said, that I'm going to pray for you that you can do this all your life. I said, thank you, ma'am. And that was a nice gesture. And I said, wait just a minute. I said, you need to pray for Tom Hill. She says, I'm not going to pray for him. I don't even know him. I said, listen, ma'am, I don't mean to be critical, but if he dies tonight, I won't even be able to get on the radio to tell you he died. Thank you, Mr.
All right, you're welcome. And he's the pride and joy of Blytheville, Arkansas. All right, back over to you.
You guys start. I want to hear what your stories are before I share any of my stories.
I've got a story that'll curl your hair. By the way, my late dad, Art Rogers, worked his first radio job at KDRS for Mr. Rand a long time ago. He and Charlie Raspberry. And it was his fault that I got into radio to begin with, because my Uncle Bud, he and Art started KWYN and WIN in 1956. And when I was a sophomore in high school, my dad came home and said, Uncle Bud needs somebody to work the ball games on Friday night and Saturday and Sunday, and you're it. And I said, I don't know anything about it. And I didn't, so he took me out there. It was a daytimer at the time, signed off at sunset. He showed me how to queue up records, queue up tapes, read the news, use the board and all that stuff. I was in love. I told Marty when he interviewed me before I went to work at KASU as a volunteer, that's what happened. And I just loved it. It gets in your blood. You all know it. You can't get it out. So after being out of radio for 10 and a half years, I talked to Mark Smith and Marty Scarborough I said, man, you guys need to play some progressive rock. And Mark said, would you host the show? And I said, well, I didn't even think about that. And I said, yeah, let me think about it. So we met, and I came up with some ideas, and almost 6 years later, I'm still doing it every Sunday night. And I love working at KASU. It's a great place, great people. And I get to play what I want to play and say what I want to say, just like Tom Petty says. But anyway, I think y'all enjoy this little story. In 1968, I went to work at WMPS in Memphis. Big radio station. I was 22 years old and didn't know from Shinola. But I was going to go to work for WMPS. Had been working at KBTM. So I got a job over there. I think they hired me because I sounded like the guy who was leaving. I honestly think that's what happened. But anyway, I thought, man, I'm going to make big bucks over there. I was making $115 at KBTM a week. And when I met with Alan Avery at WPS, he said, the job is yours for $125 a week if you want it. And I said, I'll take it. So I went to work doing an afternoon drive at WMPS in Memphis. It was a great learning experience. Well, that August, WHBQ had a new program director who's now a good friend of mine. His name is Scooter B. Seagraves, and he was dynamite on the air. He was a killer power Drake jock. And he started kicking our butt in the ratings. So Hal Smith, the program director, said, we got to come up with a promotion. So they came up with this promotional idea. And he brought me and Johnny Dark in one afternoon. Johnny Dark did our nighttime shift. And at one time, 7 to 10 p.m., he had the highest ratings in Memphis radio ever. And he looked like a Beatle. And he had this deep voice. He was great on the air. They said, we're thinking about maybe setting a new Mid-South Ferris wheel record. And Johnny Dark kind of got, what? He said, we want you to go out to the fairgrounds and ride the Ferris wheel. So I went with him. We went out there. About the third time around, Johnny said, man, I got to get off. I'm going to barf. and he did. So I continued to ride it for an hour. And I said, I think I can do this. So by default, they gave me the gig, and they said, we'll pay you a nice bonus if you'll ride the Ferris wheel for 3 days. I said, okay, do I get off to go to the bathroom and eat? And they said, we'll feed you on the wheel, and you can get off after midnight to go to the bathroom. I said, yeah, and take a shower and all that good stuff. So anyway, I did actually ride the Ferris wheel for 3 days, and it was the climax was a Young Rascals concert on that Sunday. And I got to MC almost every show that summer in Memphis, so I got to meet a lot of really cool musicians. But the Rascals were just great. They were one of my favorites, so I got to MC them that night. And, oh my gosh, the polar bear freeze across the street fed me. I must have gained 30 pounds that 3 days. And people came by after midnight and wanted to ride with me. Girls from down the street at a strip bar. Can I say that? And they rode with me, and it was just, I got, the last day I rode was Sunday, and Booker T and the MGs rode with me, and Steve Cropper and a couple other musicians. So it was really, really exciting. And then in November, the ratings went down, and all of a sudden people started leaving the station, and I got fired. So I said, hey, it is what it is. So I ended up going to Tupelo, Mississippi in December of 1968, and I spent 28 days there. It was not fun. That was not a good market. But anyway, I had a lot of fun in Memphis, met a lot of good people. I've still got friends who worked at the station. Johnny Dark came back. Of course, he passed away, but he was the weatherman on Channel 3 for a long time. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Did you make the Guinness Book?
I don't think so, because the next year, some guy from Tupelo beat my record. He wrote it for 4 days.
Well, you noticed he said the Mid-South regional record.
Mid-South. I was the Mid-South champ for 1 year.
Well, when I tell that story, you were the world record. Just so you know.
And they can't take that away from you, ever. Ever. They can't.
I got pictures to prove it.
There you go. All right. Well, let's see. What would be a good story? There's so many to choose from.
Radio, that's always.
Okay. I knew from the time I was about 7 or 8 years old that I wanted to be on the radio. And one of the reasons was because in my hometown, Fresno, California, it did all start out a 5,000-watt radio station in Fresno, California. And that 5,000-watt radio station was KYNO, 13 Kino. Now, this was, I was born in 60, and so I was really kind of being aware of things around me when I was about 5, 6 years old. There was always a radio on in our house because many of my 6 older brothers were still living in the house. I was the youngest of 8 boys, actually. And so there was always a radio on to cover up their noise, I guess, or something. But I remember being put down for naps with the radio going, and it was always on Kino because that was the biggest station in town, and they were the top 40 station. But long about 1965 or so, they adopted what became known as Boss Radio. And Boss Radio was a big experimentation with a station in Los Angeles, 93 KHJ, legendary station that went from worst in the Los Angeles market to first in 6 months. And just a legendary station. So that was the radio environment that I grew up listening to, was Boss Jocks. And they sounded like they were having a great time on the radio. They got to play all this great music. And it didn't hurt that for a few years I went to a Catholic school right next door to the Kino studios. I would show up there every day after school. It was the 5th grade. I would show up there almost every day after school before I headed home on my bicycle, just to see what was going on. And there was a little reception area, and then there was secretaries and traffic people, and I didn't know what they were at the time, but of course they were all doing their jobs out in this kind of just this open area. And one of the people that worked there was a nice man named David Bellman. And it come to find out that he was he had a job called the production director. And he knew that I was just eat up with wanting to be in the radio, and I wanted to see what was going on. Unfortunately, the only studio I could see into there was a window on the wall behind the bench where I would sit and just watch things. And that was a production studio. And so every once in a while, I'd see somebody pop in there. They'd do something on one of the machines. They'd do something with tape, and they'd do something into the microphone, and then they'd run out, right? Well, one day, after coming in here almost every day, Mr. Bellman comes over to me and he says, I'd like you to do a favor for me. Would you do a favor? And I said, sure, what do you need? He said, come with me. And he opens the little wrought iron gate that closed off the reception area, and he ushers me up towards the production studio, and I'm hearing, oh, wow. So he pulls me into, he opens the door, lets me in the production studio. I'm standing there looking at this board with all these knobs and this microphone and these big reel-to-reel tape decks over here, and there's these turntables over here and everything. I'm just, cart machines. I'm just like, wow, I'm really in the radio station. He said, hang on, I'll be right back, so just sit tight. So I just stood there, and I'm just looking at all this, taking it all in. A few minutes later, he comes back from his typewriter. This was 1970, 69 or 70. He comes back from his typewriter, hands me a yellow sheet of paper with some lines on it, and he says, here's what I'm going to do. He's telling me this while he's erasing a reel of tape and throwing it on one of the Ampex machines. And he says, here's what I want you to do. We're going to start recording, and I'm going to point to you. When I point to you, read what's on the page, and then pause, and then wait for me to point to you again. I'll point to you again, and we'll do the same thing. We'll do it for all these lines. I said, okay. I mean, I was already somewhat theatrical. I was, I had no problem being in stage plays, school plays, and things like that at the time. So he had me read these lines, and he said, oh, and if you mess up, just start back at the beginning and read it again. So, okay. So I did it, and I didn't think anything of it, really. I mean, I thought, well, this is kind of cool. Maybe, I guess it's going to be part of a commercial, because it was about, it was for Ace Firestone store in Fresno, and they had their ad campaign was for their retreads. Now, this was back in the day when you could get retread tires for your cars, right? And a little while later, or a matter of days later, I hear a commercial on Kino, and there's my little 9-10-year-old voice saying, hey, Dad, what's the difference between a rethread and a tire? And then he edited in one of the disc jockeys saying, it's retreads, Timmy, it's retreads, not rethreads, Timmy. Retreads are tires that have had the tread worn off, and they've had new tread put back on. And my line was, are rethreads any good? And he says, retreads, Timmy. Well, they can be, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And so it wound up being for Ace Firestone. Well, a little while after that, I was there again in the afternoon, and he said, you want to do another one for me? I said, sure, yeah. So he took me in, and this one was for the red carpet car wash. And all it was it was supposed to be like a montage of voices talking about how great red carpet car wash was. And one of my lines was, my dad takes our car to red car wash, and he likes them real well. And the other one was, he says they do a groovy job. So that was it. I was hooked. I knew at that point I wanted to be on the radio. I'd also wanted to play drums as a musician, so I started doing that as well. And later on, when I finally got into a country band after doing some rock and roll in my high school years, I got into my first country band, and I started listening to country radio, which I really hadn't paid that much attention to. That was my dad's stuff. He liked that. I didn't. I was a rocker. But I started listening, and I started really liking the music and realizing I needed to learn how to play it right on the drums if I was going to be a good drummer, right? So then, when I got my first job in radio, part-time, it was on a country station. And so I had the benefit of being able to hear all the latest country songs that were coming out and being able to go to the band and say, hey, there's this new song by, Waylon Jennings. Let's work this one up, And so they kind of went parallel and stood me in good stead for a lot of years. And so I was able, I guess I'm one of the fortunate ones. I feel blessed because the two things that I wanted to do in my life, I got to do. And for a while, I made my living as a musician back when bands played 5 or 6 nights a week all around the Fresno area and elsewhere, Bakersfield too. And I got to be on the radio. And so that was just, and I'm back. and I'm not leaving. They're going to have to cart me down the stairs at the Max Meyer building. So I'm just, that's where it all started for me. It's just been in my blood, like he said, ever since I was a little kid.
Well, I don't know if I can top that. So I started radio in 1989. I moved to Texas after high school, followed a boy, bad mistake. You see people on Facebook saying, talk to your 18-year-old self, and I'm like, he's not the one. That's what I tell myself. But I had done an internship. I went to college and was studying radio, TV, and did an internship at a TV station. Found out that really wasn't really what I wanted to do. Came back to Fort Smith, and it was summertime. I needed a job. My parents were like, you got to get a job. So I applied for a newsreader position because I wanted to be a serious journalist. And it was an AM station in Fort Smith, KFSA. And I go in to do the interview, and I, rip and read some AP copy. And they were like, you'd make a great, DJ. And I was like, I'm going to be a serious journalist. So I declined the offer. And I'm driving home, and I'm listening to the FM station, the sister station, Kisser, KISR, which I'd grown up listening to. That was just, we went to the lake, we laid out of the, and tanned with iodine and baby oil, and listened to the, to Kisser and Top 40 station. And the guy on the air was just having so much fun, and I thought, I can do that for a summer, until I get a real job, So I go back, and I said, if you'll give me a shot, I'll give it a try. So it started out, I was running Cowboys games on Sunday and Solid Gold Saturday night. So I got schooled very quickly in music that was before I was born. Okay, I feel really young up here because he's talking about being born in 60. I was born in 69, so I think I'm the baby. I usually don't feel young in any crowd anymore, but it was a learning experience. I remember these big giant reels from recording the Paul Harvey segments. I mean, I was like, I was probably the only 18-year-old that loved the rest of the story. I'm still a Paul Harvey fan to this day. I mean, I go online and listen to those all the time. I just love them. When I first started at the Fox, we were still playing that at 11:45 until 12 o'clock every day. And one of my radio memories was right after a Paul Harvey segment in 1998 was when the West Side shooting happened, and we were in the Simmons Bank building. I'm jumping around here, but that's probably one of those momentous on-air experiences that I had, was being in the Simmons Bank building, and everybody was at lunch. And we had just started voice tracking, but we didn't use it a lot, just on the weekends. And I remember we all had, nobody had we had cell phones, but mostly it was pagers. And I remember getting that phone call. My mother-in-law worked at the Craighead County Assessor's Office, and she called me and she said, something is happening. Something's happened bad. All the deputies have left the Craighead County Courthouse, and they're like, it's bad. And she said, have you heard anything? And I'm like, I don't know. And then phone calls started coming in that there was this mass shooting at Westside Elementary. And I remember texting Trey going, y'all got to get up there. I don't know what to do. And I was just panicked. And that was probably one of the most, I guess, detailed memories I have, and showing what radio can do for its community in a time of crisis. And, at that point, we weren't just playing music and giving the weather and being funny and being cute. We were delivering important information to our community, and we were grieving with our community at the same time. And I remember, Jonesboro was just descended upon by all these networks. I mean, it was just crazy that all these satellite trucks were everywhere, and they were calling for, CNN. I remember I did an interview on CNN, and I was just like, I don't know that I'm equipped to do this. You need to talk to Trey, But I remember, and they were just like, we want to know what you're feeling. And I said, well, honestly, we want you guys just to go away. Yeah. Let us grieve. Let us mourn what has happened in our community. But that was probably a pivotal moment for me. That, and anytime there's been something terrible that's happened, that we get the opportunity, we get the blessing to be able to be that comforting voice when people are hurting. Or, used to, people called radio stations all the time. And that's kind of, there's people still call, but, when you're on the air, when you're live, they're calling, and there's usually a storm or a celebration. There's either something bad's happening to them or something really good. And I think it's just an honor and a privilege to be able to be a part of so many people's lives in that way. Not just all the good stuff, but to be there to comfort people. And, I think probably everybody here has taken a call from somebody who's just really having a bad time, and you have a chance to talk to them, and all they want is somebody to listen to them. And we take for granted sometimes that there are people out there that we are the only communication and just connection that we have with people. We're a friend. And so when you see people out and they come up to you, I remember my husband used to say, gosh, do you know that person? I'm like, nope. And he goes, but they act like they know you. I said, because they do. They feel like they know me. And I've always been a really open book on my life and challenges. And, most recently, 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and our community just gathered around me. And I knew that I couldn't just disappear to get treated. I had to tell everybody. And it was probably the best thing, that ever, it's not, well, I wouldn't say it's the best thing that ever happened to me, but it changed me for the better and made me realize that, we are a community that can help one another. And all you have to do is just say, hey, I need you, and people will be there, and we can do the same for them.
Clap for Christy. One thing about being down the line is people that say things and you want to respond to them. There's things Marty said, Dennis, Skeeter, Christy. You didn't text me in 98. No, you paged me. And I remember where I was. I was at Dixie Cafe meeting with the girl, Gray, was her last name, from Cherokee Village, about bull bust. And we were having a meeting at Dixie Cafe, and I got the 911 page. And Trey, I think there's something going on at West Side. And okay, so I hung up and I went and sat back down, and I sat there for about 30 seconds, and I said, guys, I think I need to go. And so the next thing I remember is the late Mark Ford, who I worked with, and Charlie Fox, who worked with us, coming by in the Fox van to Dixie Cafe to pick me up. We go out toward West Side. We're starting to turn onto 91 off of the bypass. The deputies are starting to block that road. We feel like we've got to get to West Side, so we go over through this grass pasture to go get around them, and we're going through the ditches, and the Fox van's bottoming it out, but we got there. Wow. So let me tell you how I got started in radio. I didn't have a 5,000 watt radio station. I had a 250 watt radio station in my town. You have light bulbs that have more watts than our station had. KPCA, but like Skeeter was talking about, even in a small community, Marktree, it was a deal where, back then everyone listened to the local radio station. And there were two guys that were on that station, Bill Lawson and Jerry Ashlock. They're both gone, but they did a show called The Treehouse. And the Treehouse, the radio station was about a 30 by 30 foot block building that sat about 200 feet off the road, Liberty Street. And these guys would string a big long mic cable out to the side of the road, sit underneath a John Deere umbrella, and talk for an hour every day on the Treehouse. And they would go around town, take notes during the day of stuff going on, and they'd sit there and talk for an hour. Well, my mom was a school teacher. I was in the 4th grade, 9, Skeeter, and we would listen to the Treehouse driving home every afternoon. And I asked my mom one day, I said, well, Mom, they don't ever talk about school. Why don't they ever say anything about school? She says, well, I don't know. Maybe you ought to write them out some school news. So that night I went in my bedroom, and I don't know what I wrote, but I wrote out something on a sheet of notebook paper. And the next day we got ready to leave school. And I said, Mom, we need to go by the radio station. And she said, why? I said, well, I wrote out some school news. We need to take it to Bill and Jerry. So I did. We pull up at the radio station. They're sitting under the umbrella, and I get out, and they see me coming up. Hey, Trey boy. Everybody knows everybody in Marktree. And so, what do you do? I said, well, I brought you some school news. And I'll never forget, Bill Lawson said the most beautiful words I've ever heard. He said, well, why don't you read it? And so they handed me the microphone, and I read that school news. And when the show was over, they invited me in and gave me a tour. Didn't take long. But I can remember how that place smelled. I bet you can remember how KWYN smelled. It was full of records and vinyl and magnetic tapes, and it smelled great. And oh, I'm telling you, and I knew right then, I said, I don't know what this is all about, but that's when I quit Little League baseball and everything else that kids are supposed to do, and all I wanted to do was hang around the radio station. And sometimes I could feel like they were kind of getting a little anxious about the kid hanging around, and so I'd clean out the bathrooms with Pine Sol or throw the trash out or something to make them feel sorry for me, so they'd let me hang around a little longer. And I just I just stood around and watched and just hoped that one of them would have to go pee or something so I could start the next record, or, you know. And I'm telling you, but anyway, so many connections with Christy's story and Skeeter. That longing just to be there and see something happen. Kind of tie a story with Dennis in Memphis. My only Memphis story, I used to take organ lessons from a guy named Larry Cunningham at Fun's Music on Union, which was just down the street from WMC's building. And my dad would take me over there on Saturdays, and after we'd go to Crystal, and I'd get me 2 or 3 Crystal burgers, but that doesn't have anything to do with this story. But anyway, one day I told my dad, I said, it was during the week, and I said, I want to go down to Channel 5, and I want to go visit. And so we pull up down there to WMC, and I walked in by myself, walked up to the receptionist, and she said, can I help you? I said, I'd like a tour. I'm probably 10, maybe, I don't know. And, okay, well, who are you? She asked my name and stuff. Well, she left. Well, and I'll never forget this. Here comes this big round man. His name was Dean Osmondson. He was the general manager at WMC. And he came out and he introduced himself to me. And he took me around to all the TV station, took me through the AM. There was even something in there called FM that I didn't know much about. And he took me through all that, and he took me in his office. I remember it was so cool. He had curtains on his back wall. And I bet he talked to me for 30 minutes. And I'm thinking in today's busy world, you know, that was a big deal, man. And, you know, I don't know how long I was in there. I went out, and then my dad said, what happened? I said, well, they gave me a tour. Let's go home. But anyway, it's all I know how to do. It's all I've ever wanted to do is what I do. So there you go. Big O.
Thank you very much. You know, talking about helping out the community, that's what we're here for. That's what we signed up for the license for. But it is to have a lot of fun, obviously. But I get thinking back, the ice storm. And being here in Clay County, I remember that Clay County, nobody had electricity in Clay County for about a day and a half or whatever like that. And unfortunately, our brothers and sisters in the TV game weren't getting watched as much because the streaming couldn't turn your TV on, but you could turn that battery operated radio on. You could go out to your car and stay warm and listen. And I made a lot of friends that way, you know, and that was fun. I have friends up here and over in Pocahontas and everything. Let me change this completely. Now it's time to talk about mistakes. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know where to start really. My first general manager, station manager, was Wilma Wheelis. And and Wilma knew her stuff, but you know I was a precocious 18-year-old and I knew more. And I had to spell it later. I had to look it up on my phone. But she's the first one that came in. You know, again, it was Brian Osborne all growing up until I got into radio, and it was Brian Osborne after that. She told me the difference between a picture and a picture. One's a photograph, one throws a baseball or you pour water out of. I was the one that came in there, and this out of Nice, France. No, it's not Nice, France. It's Nice, you know, things like that. So those are little things that kind of happen. So anybody here familiar with George Carlin, the comedian? About 1973, 4, 5, or 6, he came out in his routine. He worked kind of harsh, but he came out with there was a list of words that you were never supposed to say on the radio. Okay? During my career,
You said them all.
well, I didn't say them all, but I did say 3 out of the 7 in one tirade, and then I'd said a couple of others that didn't quite make it to the air, and I kind of got warned. I'm really not that bad of a potty mouth, but every once in a while. And so I worked at KDRS, then got fired. And that was easy because I had a full-time job then working for Horner Motor Company. And Wilma called me, and we had this automation system somebody mentioned a while ago, and it was terrible. And she said, "Did you know what you said on the radio this morning?" I said, I think I do, but only if that machine made a mistake. And she goes, well, that machine made a mistake, Brian. I'm going to fire you. So I've got a full-time job. I say, hey, Wilma, do what you got to do. Long story short, she hired me back in 6 months. So I go to work for Trey, and Trey gets this great idea. Miss Arkansas was from Paragould. Carol Lawson. He gets the idea to send me and the sales manager up to Atlantic City to cover it. And it was kind of cool. Yeah, it was official business. And this was when it was in the old, whatever that old building was in Atlantic City, just off the boardwalk and all of that type of thing. And so I did the first report that night. So it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Everybody sees Saturday, but it happens on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and Saturday. So the night before, I do a quick check-in. I'm recording over the phone, and I made a mistake. Because even though it was 1987, it was supposed to be the 1988 pageant. So I started out, I said, all right, here we go in 3, 2, 1. Hey, this is Brian Osborne live for K105 at the 1987 Miss America. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. Insert the word I can't say in front of all y'all. Let's start over. 3, 2, 1, and I recorded, and it turned out okay. The gentleman that was working the board that night queued up the original cut. Now, one of the nicest people to ever be on this earth was Mrs. Block, Cat Block. Sweet woman, just a fantastic woman. So we check in the next morning with Trey, and he goes, "Did you have a little trouble last night?" And I think my reply had a couple of words in it, like, "Well, well, Mrs. Block called today and complimented you on doing the report, complimenting on us covering the Miss America pageant and everything. Now, Big O had a little trouble last night, didn't he? But that's okay." So that was the difference between Trey and my original job. He didn't fire me, and I'm interested because everybody here at the table has made a mistake or two. Okay, so let's throw that down to Dennis. Not Marty. He's an angel. Look at him back there.
We skipped him earlier.
Okay, when I was at KWYN as a baby DJ, I was still in high school. And you two guys will remember this. Some of the commercials were on discs, albums, 16 inchers. Okay. Yeah, man, absolutely. And Schlitz beer. So I was running my afternoon shift one day, not knowing that there was a school bus full of my high school buddies coming back from a sporting event. And I queued up the commercial, and it had a tag. And I'm not going to say what I said.
Did it rhyme with Schlitz?
But it rhymes with Schlitz. And I said, Schlitz beer is distributed by West Memphis. And I queued up the next record, and I hit the button, and I just went, oh, I'm dead. Because my uncle owned the station. My dad was the chief announcer, engineer, and news director. I was dead meat. Nobody said a word. Until the next morning I got to school, and every one of those kids on that bus said, "Hey, Dennis, what did you say on the air yesterday?" One other quick story about Trey. I hope you remember this. First time I met Trey, I was working at a record store in Jonesboro. You remember it, Joey? White Dog. And Trey came in with his mom, and you were probably 10 or 11 years old, and she was going to buy you a Lafayette CB radio for your birthday. And Trey, even then, Trey was Trey. And he came right up to the counter where I was behind this huge cash register we had, and he said, stuck that hand out, and he said, "I'm Trey Stafford, I'm going to be a radio guy." And sure enough,
I have one. Well, it's not really. I'm not going to say I've never made a mistake on the air, but this was a mistake on the air with carts. So our commercials were on carts, and I was working at KFIN at the time and doing middays. I feel like I've done middays my whole life. I pretty much have since 1992, but. I remember we would stack up the commercials, and I was like, you get bored. I mean, I'll just tell you, sometimes you get bored sitting there for 6 hours. And I had stacked up like 3 hours worth of commercials. And there's a reason that they say no drinks in the studio. I knocked over a soda, and it went into all these carts, and I'm like shaking them out. And then you can get, I go to the next commercial break, stick it in the cart, eek. So stick the next one, eek. And I do this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Because they weren't on the computer. There was no computer. And we didn't have, I'm the reason that we started doing backups at KFIN on commercials, because Michael Steele was the program director or production director at the time, and he had to recut 12 ads because of me. And I didn't think he was going to ever speak to me again. But I'll never forget that sound of those cart machines going, eek, eek. And then I was like, I ruined an entire cart deck, and 12 commercials had to redo.
Well, that reminds me. I was going to tell a different story, but when she said that one, it's like, oh yeah, I did that. I was doing a couple of quick stories. One, I was doing overnights on a 50,000 watt AM station in Fresno. Well, because I was in a bigger town, Trey. Fresno was considered a pretty big town in those days. And it was overnight. It was when we had live disc jockeys on basically 24/7 at that point. This would have been in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, so about 86, 87, somewhere in there, maybe earlier. Overnight, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, something like that. And the control room for KFRE was all the way down at the end of the hall, opposite from where the kitchen area with the coffee maker was. So it was a bit of a walk, probably about as far as from here to that set of doors back there, okay? So I just made myself a nice fresh cup of coffee, and back in those days I took it with cream and sugar, and I'd started a song, and I knew I had enough time to run out there and get the coffee and everything. So I come back, and I set my coffee on the counter right in front of the board. Here's this big mixing board right here, the big control board. Turntables were over here, and my song is running out. And I'm like, oh boy, I got to get a record queued up, because the next thing I was going to play was on a 45. So I'm over there queuing off the air, and I'm like, I got it just right, and I'm ready. Song's fading. I go to reach for because the turntables had a remote start on the board. So I go to reach for that remote start. Coffee, cream, and sugar down into this BMX board, and everything just kind of went. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's 3:30 in the morning. I called our chief engineer, who lived about 40 miles away, Hal Tarosian, rest his soul. He was this big Armenian guy that smoked these big, long green cigars. And I called Hal, and I said, Hal, I've done something bad. I've dumped a cup of coffee into the board. And now Hal used every one of the 7 words, not just in regular conversation. He was that way, He'd say, "Hey Hal, there's something wrong with this tape deck over here. Can you fix it?" They never give me enough blankety blank money to fix the blankety blank thing, So, and he had this big booming voice. Okay, Hal, can you just fix it? I don't need your story. So Hal finally makes it up there, and I think I somehow patched in the. I grabbed one of the reel-to-reels that played on our FM station in the automation, and I threw it up on one of the reel-to-reel decks that were in the AM studio, and I at least had some music playing somehow through the board. And long story short on that one, I actually did probably about $600 worth of damage to the board. I didn't get fired. I got a good talking to. And Hal said, well, if you hadn't had cream and sugar in your coffee, it would have been a matter of pulling these modules out and rinsing them out with water, letting them dry out, and they would have been fine. But just all the cream and sugar in there that messed everything up. So, yeah. Only this time it was the board that went. So, and of course it had to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. Let me back up just a little earlier than that, a couple of years. And the reason why I started drinking coffee was because I was doing my first full-time radio gig. It was on another station in Fresno. This one was only 1,000 watts, by the way.
Still more than I
It's again an overnight shift, and I'm sitting there, and we had the music on the cartridges too for the most part, but the brand new songs that had just been added to the playlist, they were still on 45s, and if they moved up in rotation, they moved up the charts, then we would put them on the carts because we were going to play them more often. So I put a new George Strait single on the turntable over here, and I got it ready, and I think it was "You Look So Good in Love," maybe, because it was a slow song, and I guess I hadn't gotten enough sleep that day, and I'm sitting there and my eyes are just burning because it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh. And so I put this song on. I started, K-Make, here's a new one from George Strait, "You Look So Good in Love." Turn the mic off, and I'm like, I think I'm just going to rest my eyes for just a moment here. So and I didn't wear glasses at the time, so I just kind of went like this in front of the board, and I don't know what caused me to do it, but I went like this. Looked at the clock, realized how long the George Strait song was compared to when I started it and what time it was on the clock, and it's sitting there going because of course the turntables were manual. They didn't automatically pick the tone arm up like your home stereo one would, right? So this thing's going like that. I'm like, oh my God, okay. So I grabbed one of the songs that was on cart and I jammed it into the cart machine. I started it, didn't say a word. No phone calls, not even listeners. No, there was no repercussions from that incident, but I think it went for about 3.5 minutes or so. And so I go, well, I guess I got to learn how to drink coffee because I never drank it at that point. I'm 23 at the time, I think. 23. And so I went out to there, I made some coffee, and I took a sip of the black coffee, and I went, I said, I got to make this taste like cocoa, so I just dumped cream and sugar and said, yeah, okay, now that's why I had so much cream and sugar in the coffee cup that went into the board at another station. So that was my big mistake.
Well, gosh, so many stories. I mean, the live time in radio was just the best. I mean, it was the greatest. I mean, you talk about falling asleep, Skeeter. I can remember working weekends at Truman, and Pizza Hut was about 1.25 miles from the radio station, Well, the long version of Lion Eyes by the Eagles was, I think, 6 minutes and 48 seconds approximately. And if I ordered my beef thin crust Pizza Hut pizza and went down there, if everything went right, I could make it and make it back. But Lion Eyes was the last cut on the album, and if I didn't make it back, that's the sound you would get, and it did happen a couple of times. But you talk about the words on the radio. My worst cussing on the radio happened when I was 13 years old.
Well, you learned that.
No, I'm not kidding. I remember, Mark Tree, these little radio stations, I mean, there's people that have gone on in the business. Stuart Bruner was a friend of mine. We worked together. He was 2 or 3 years older than me. But he worked at KPCA and Mark Tree with me, and we were both in high school. Well, he was in high school, I wasn't. But this was during the summer, and he was working sign-on till 1 o'clock, and then I came on at 1. And our board, the place where the board was up. You stepped up into this wooden, almost like a stage thing, and you had this big counter, and the console was here, and there was a turntable over here, a turntable over here, but the counter was up about chest high if you were standing on the floor, and the turntable was there, and the turntable was up against the outside edge of the deal. And so I've got my record queued up where ARN News is on 12:55, and it comes out, and we did the weather at the top of the hour. So Stuart had come down, I'd taken my spot, and Stuart, is walking around, and so the new Don Corbett, ARN News, and I did the weather, and it's 1 o'clock at KPCA 1580 Mark Tree. Turned on the turntable, and it didn't go. And I'm checking to make sure it's in gear. And about that time, over on the other side of the counter, I could see Stuart. He had his thumb right there on the turntable holding it. And before I thought, I said, "S. Stuart, let go of the D turntable." And about that time, out of this ear, I could hear the VU meter. I knew it just went out over the air. Hey, but they couldn't fire me. I wasn't getting paid anyway. Marty's got to have something over there.
Come on, Marty. You got to have something.
Well, KASU is a little bit different radio station than what these guys do on a daily basis. Well, the closest I've ever sworn on the air, and I think I can say this word maybe because it's a PG-13 crowd. Okay, I'll put it that way. There was this guy who used to hang around KASU all the time. Retired gentleman, super sweet. He'd do all kinds of jobs for us whenever we wanted to, but he could get on your nerves just a little bit. And I was doing the Bluegrass radio show at the time, and one of those great classic bluegrass songs is called "I Wonder How the Old Folks Are at Home." This guy comes in the middle of this song and is starting to harass me. And not harass me, but, it's just like, John, I got to get back on. I'm glad you're here. I got to get back on the air. Well, he ends up staying in the room while I do the back announce. And my back announce was, that was the Bluegrass Gentleman with "I Wonder How the Old Farts Are at Home." So this gentleman thought that I was making a derogatory statement toward him at the time, but maybe in the back of my mind.
It was a Freudian slip, total Freudian slip.
Okay, I'll have a topic starting here. Okay, so you're talking about people that hang around the radio station or callers. Tell me about a time where someone, maybe, stalker-ish. I'll start. So I was working at KZ100. This was 1990, 91. And I worked 7 to midnight. That was the only time I ever worked nights in my whole career. Worked 7 to midnight. And, I was 19, I guess, when I came to Jonesboro. And I had a gentleman that would call every night, over and over and over. And I was always kind, and because I thought, I'm new at this. But one night, at the time I was going to school at ASU. I would go to school from 8 to 12. I worked for Carter's Corner from 1 to 5, and then I went to the radio station from 7 to midnight. And then I went to the 501 afterwards. So, don't ask me when I slept or ate, because I didn't do very much of either. I was poor, and I was trying to do it all. But one night I pulled in Simmons Bank. They had the glass was mirrored. So I pull in and I'm driving this. I have a little white F-150, little Ranger, little Ford Ranger pickup. That's what I drove. My dad got me a new truck because it was cheap. And so I pull up and I have my arms full of my school books and my keys. Well, for some reason they gave us keys to the bank to get in. And so I'm walking up to the car, to the door, and it's mirrored. So I hear, and when I pulled in, I noticed that somebody had pulled up beside me. Well, I didn't think anything of it. Well, I go to the door, and I hear someone walking behind me, and I look up, and I see this person, which I had no idea who this person was until he spoke. And he reaches out and goes to grab me, and he says, "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to touch you." I freak out. Doors locked. I drop my books, drop my keys. There's a little Hispanic lady that cleaned the bank, and I'm banging on the door, and she's not knowing what to do. I'm trying to get in. I'm running. I ran around Simmons Bank trying to get away from this guy. And finally, she opens the door, and I'm like, "What?" And she doesn't speak a bit of English. And I'm like boo-hooing, thinking this guy's going to get me. And but I'll never forget this man. And he had hair that looked like doll hair, like the little dolls with the little plugs. Oh, yeah. But he was like, "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to touch you." And I'm like, "No, no, we're not." So tell me of a stalkerish person that you've had.
Well, my first, most of my problems involve people on the phone. You know what I'm saying? Because you're a guy on the radio and you're doing a show and people would call you and so when I was a kid, my voice hadn't changed yet, and so I was on the radio station at Truman, And I was Trey Stafford, and I was on the radio at KTMN, and these guys would call me, and hey, Tracy, how you doing? You want to go out? What do you mean go out? I'm a boy. No, you're not. But then, as you get older, the girls would call some, and I remember one time in Paragould, I was not married at the time. Didn't want to be married at the time. I liked that. But Tina started calling, and boy, Tina sounded hot, man. And Tina would call. Oh, she would call, and we'd talk, and we were talking so good, and everything was just great. And I remember one Saturday morning I was working, and at K105, remember the long gravel, I looked down, and here comes this car, and this car pulls up, and this thing gets out. 350.
This is your story.
Big. And I thought about, she's getting out with flowers.
Oh.
I'm like, that's Tina. I just know it. Boy, and I went and I locked that door. Hid so she couldn't look in the window. Then she used to come and stalk me at Hardee's for a while, when we did the Breakfast Club up there. And anyway, that's just one of those stories.
I was about to say, I didn't think if any of the guys would actually have stalker stories. We usually appreciated the attention. But I'm so glad you told me that story. What was the name? Oh, no, the guys that called you. Tracy. Everybody make a mental note of that. Tracy. I don't think I had any stalkers, to be honest with you. Well, now we've got him going.
I'm not a stalker. I had another idea for just.
Okay.
Okay.
Marty's got an idea.
Well, sometimes in radio you get to have a brush with greatness. Big name musicians, actors, people who are coming in the community. And so there were a couple of times when I've had the chance to visit with people who are very well known in their industry. And part of the thing I do on KASU radio is I'll do really in-depth, like half-hour long, heart-to-heart Barbara Walters kind of conversations with people who are musicians. And there was this super well-known Christian contemporary musician who was coming to do a concert in Jonesboro. I'm a big fan. I didn't tell him this during the course of the interview. One of the reasons I got into radio is because I'm a wannabe musician, but I learned I play music much better on the radio than with a musical instrument. And so I'm interviewing this guy, and we have a great conversation, and we're done. And I said, I play in the praise band at my church, and we really love your music. And I said, I just want to apologize for all the really lousy versions of your songs that we've done in our church. And he said, well, that's okay. I've done lots of really lousy versions of my songs in concert, too. So there was that one. And then one of the things we do is we do a lot of concerts for KASU Radio. And these guys know about promoting concerts and things like that. And so I was meeting this one band, and I was actually going to escort them out to Channel 8 because they were going to play live on midday to promote their concert later that night. So I knew where their bus was going to be. I was going to meet them and go with them out to Channel 8 because if you're not from around here, this was in the days before GPS. You need someone to escort you out to get out there. So I get out there, I knock on the door of the bus, and the guys in the band are like, hey, yeah, we're expecting you to come on in. So I'm visiting with the guys in the band. Meanwhile, the lead singer, the main guy that's going to be the head of the band, the star, is back in the back and not aware of the fact that I've come onto the bus, who then emerges from the curtain at the back of the bus wearing nothing but his whitey tighties and sees me there in the front of the bus. And from this day forward, whenever I play his music, the image in my brain that is forever burned into my brain is this well-known musician and his underwear. So.
Wow. Oh, Dennis, you got something. Who, me? That you've interviewed.
Well, you mentioned Kisser. I worked with Fred at KMAG.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that.
Yeah, and he was crazy.
He still is.
But he was working. I was doing mornings and PDing, and he was doing the night shift. And even then, this was 1969. I went to work there on Labor Day 1969. I came back to Jonesboro Labor Day 1970. even then, he was trying, because we had Cardinal baseball. We carried Cardinal baseball. If he had a game, he would try to automate it. He would try to figure out some way that he could goof off while the game was on, but get the commercials played. And he was really a genius, but he was a royal pain in the butt to work with because he was never doing what he was supposed to be doing, you know. But anyway, there were lots of people like that in radio, crazy people.
He was Fred Baker was, you know, he was, like I said, actually wasn't my first program director. Stan Steele was my first program director at KFSA, and then of course Fred owned KISR, him and his dad. Yeah, he was the one that really turned me on to severe weather coverage. And he was the first, you know, I grew up and, you know, my dad was a constable and was a small town, you know, little town cop. And so when severe weather would happen, of course, in Fort Smith, you're right there on that Arkansas-Oklahoma line. Tornadoes they just land there. And when Fred would get on the air, he had a music bed that you knew when you heard that, you better get home because it was something bad was about to happen. And that was probably the thing that turned me on to severe weather coverage. And, you know, which is so important, you know, like we always talk about play Trey's bed. It's a weather bed that you probably, if I played it for you right now, you go, oh yeah, I know. Usually when you hear that.
I had to find it the other day.
and it's called Trey's weather bed.
Yep.
And if you know, you don't realize that, you know, like you said, kind of reflecting back to what I said earlier, when we're on the air, we think it's all fun and playing music and contest. And then all of a sudden, you have to do your best to be a meteorologist. And now, you know, used to we had that one little radar, and, you know, look like something on a Navy ship. And now, you know, we're looking up there, and you can pretty much wing your way through it. If you can get a radar up, you can, you know, everything. The technology there is so vast now that you can sound like you know what you're talking about. But, you know, those things that make you that the community hears, that they just feel comfort. They're like, okay, something serious is about to happen. The music bed is on, and then in any moment, Trey's going to pop on and go to your hidey hole.
Okay, you set me up for my weather story. Thank you. You're welcome. So back to KPCA. I'd taken my school news there, and I had been hanging around the radio station for a year or two, and you know, they wouldn't pay me. They kept bringing up something about child labor laws, but they were letting me spin some records on Saturday morning and so forth. And so in 1971, February of 1971, we had a tornado in Mark Tree. It came up Highway 75. It hit Delta Vocational School, hit the crop duster strip down from my house, came under my pecan tree, destroyed the playhouse that my mom and dad built for my sister and me, and all that. And, you know, caused some damage. Luckily, nobody got hurt, though. But it scared everybody. It happened in the middle of the night. And so Mark Tree, the city leaders, started talking about, oh, you know, what could we do to put in place something to make sure that if this happens again, we can warn everybody. And so they formed the Mark Tree Civil Defense. 35, no, sir. We had 35 men joined the Mark Tree Civil Defense, and they started doing training with, at that time, the U.S. Weather Bureau. The Weather Bureau came over to Mark Tree and showed all these 16-millimeter films of tornado and death and destruction and clouds, and trained them how to watch the skies for tornadoes. All of these 35 men were equipped with the latest technology, CB radios. And the plan was, if there's storms approaching, they'll disperse these 35 men to the west, to the south, to the southwest, where storms usually come from. They'll watch the skies. They'll use their CB radio to radio back to the base if they see something. And in Mark Tree at the time, the volunteer fire department, when there was a fire, they would blow the fire siren 10 times, and everybody would tune to the volunteer firemen would tune to the radio station to find out where the fire was. That was before pagers and so forth. And so anyway, if they had a weather emergency during the day, they would blow the fire siren, people would tune the radio, and they would announce that there's a tornado coming, take cover. And so they couldn't figure out, though, because the radio station was a daytime only station. It went off at sundown, and it didn't come back on until sunrise. So they decided that they could declare a local emergency and activate the emergency broadcast system and turn the station on at night in the event there was severe weather. So they've got the plan. Everybody's trained. They got their CB radios and all that. First severe weather event comes up. And they activate the civil defense, and they need to get somebody down to the radio station. And so Bill Henderson, who lived across the street from me, was the leader of the civil defense, CD1, Unit 1. He lived right across the street. And so they start calling the people on the list. DeWitt Waits, can't get him. Coleman Tucker, can't get him. Leroy Durham, can't get him. And so they say, well, how are we going to get the radio station on? And somebody says, well, you know, that Stafford kid's been hanging around down there.
Tracy.
Maybe he's got a key. So sure enough, Billy Henderson calls my house midnight or after. My dad answers the phone. CP, Billy Joe, listen, this is unusual. We've got a situation. We're declaring a local emergency. We've got some severe weather coming in, and we got to get the radio station turned on, and we can't find anybody. Does Trey have a key? Well, yeah, I think he does. Okay, well, listen, if it's okay with you, I'm going to come get him. We'll take him to the radio station. He can turn it on, and if something happens, he can announce what's going on. We won't leave him by himself. We'll leave somebody with him. He won't be there by himself, CP. Is that okay? Okay, I guess so. So my dad comes in. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. Son, Mr. Henderson called. They need you to go down and open up the radio station. Yeah! I get to be on the radio! So if I get up, throw some clothes on, Billy Joe comes over, I climb up into that truck. He takes me to the radio station. I got my key. I open it up, and I turn the transmitter on, and I sit down, boy, and I start playing records. Conway, Twitty, LeBrand. It's great. And they leave me down there with a guy named Maurice Henson. Maurice is about 75, and he's got there with a walkie-talkie in the lobby of the radio station and listening to the CB. So we're ready, man. The radio station's on. We're playing records. We've got the civil defense activated. They're watching the skies. And here's the thing. If you show a bunch of men hours of 16 millimeter films of death and destruction and tornadoes, and then you send them out for the first time in the middle of the night, all alone in a pickup truck, and there's lightning and there's thunder, and it's just them and a CB radio, one thing is absolutely guaranteed. They're going to see a tornado. And sure enough, the call comes in. This Unit 6 Painway, I got one. We got a tornado at Painway. It's headed right for Mark Tree. Tell everybody to take cover. 10-4. So I'm in there playing my records, Conway, Loretta, Merle. I got them all. Doors shut. I forget why I'm even there. You know what I'm saying? All of a sudden, Mr. Henson opens that door. Trey, there's a tornado at Painway headed right for Mark Tree. Tell everybody to take cover. Now it's serious. I stopped the record. I turned on the mic, and I announced, there's a tornado at Painway! It's headed for Mark Tree! Take cover! The next week, in the Mark Tree Tribune, the editorial written by Fred Ashcraft said, it started with, who let that kid on the radio? And you know what you need at 9 or 10 years old, Big O, is you need credibility. Yeah. You know, I needed something to happen. You know, a tree blown down or a barn destroyed or something. There wasn't nothing. Yeah, no. There wasn't a tornado. And so that's how I got my start in weather. It's very important.
That story never gets old.
It's very important.
I can't top your weather thing.
I want to say one thing. You talking about gospel music. So when I got the job as manager at KPCA in Mark Tree, I was 18. And I knew a guy named George Newcomb. and he loved gospel music. And I thought that was back, we were on the edge of block programming still. And I thought, well, we'll play country music in the morning, and then I'll hire George, and he'll come in and he'll do gospel music from 9 to 11. Now, George, the reason he wasn't on the radio anymore is because he had developed epilepsy. And so he couldn't drive anymore and all that. And so I worked a deal with George. He had a moped. And George would ride his moped to work every day unless it rained, and then Barbara, the secretary, went to get him. But he would come in and he'd play gospel music from 9 to 11. And sometimes I'd be in my office, and every once in a while the gospel record would go dead. And it was because George was having a seizure, And I'd go in and kind of wake him up, George, and then he'd kick back in and we'd go on with the show. I thought about, when you started talking about J.D. Sumner a while ago, I thought about George, rest his soul.
Big O,
He's got a mic.
we talked about my music. Now, Roy McNeil, the Prophets Quartet, tenor singer, we're playing songs that you remember. Now, we're playing songs that come out of the book and not off of the wall. Your grandma's Red Foley's on my station. But now, I do need to share this. This gentleman knows how many years we've been on the radio, 4 years, I don't know whatever, but he knows more people here than I do. But now, if y'all had a grandma that loved music, we're still playing it. Mr. Tom Hill.
Well, I spent 46 years in radio. Wanted to be an engineer. Found out right quick you had to do other things. So I spent half of that 46 years doing what y'all's doing. Spent 19 years at KCRV in Caruthersville. And last part of it in Blytheville. Cleet Stanfield. There's one little thing I want to, you're talking about mistakes. That was kind of my first full-time radio job. And back then, of course, it was rip and read off of the AP machine. Well, I wasn't very good in English. We had a man in Caruthersville named Red Dunham. He was a retired English teacher. And white-haired, had a little white mustache, and he would come up to the radio station sometimes. And one day, I ripped the news and didn't pre-read it. Well, there was a story about, this was back, let's see, I don't know, something going on in Southeast Asia. And so the word was CHAOS. And I said, blah, 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 chaos. Well, about 30 minutes later, Red Dunham shows up, and he walks in the control room, and he said, Tommy, how do you pronounce CHAOS? And before I could answer, he said, it's chaos. Stuck out his hand, gave me a peppermint, and turned around and walked out the door. But I never forgot how to pronounce chaos after that.
Imagine so.
Dennis, you'll remember a train wreck near Wynn. And
Yes.
I was on there at Truman reading AP, and my dad called me to say, that's Levesque,
Not Levesque.
not Levesque.
I knew that. Yeah. Well, Oil Trough was another one. Oh yeah. Do you remember Kit Sturdivant, who worked at KNEA? She was a great jock, but she wasn't real sharp on the news. And when they had that bus wreck over at Oil Trough. I think it killed some at Uno, but it was near Oil Trough. She got on the air and called it Oil Trowel.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And I almost came unglued. But Bill Little was the manager then, and I said, let him handle it.
I've got one on that.
All right.
Causing chaos unnecessarily. And you guys up here in this part of Arkansas will appreciate this. This was back, I guess it was in the 1990s. There was a lot of chaos happening on a island in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean, island in the Caribbean. And at the time, the government said, we're going to send some troops down there to help quell things in this particular country down there. And so one of our student announcers at KASU got on the air with this bulletin that the president has just sent 100,000 troops to stop the chaos in Haiti. And of course, visit to the control room there, and it's Haiti. It's Haiti.
You gotta train jocks on say or all the towns. There's nothing worse than, Alicia.
Yeah. Yep. Labor Day 2003. My first air shift on 1049 The Fox as the afternoon guy with my newly acquired moniker of Skeeter Nash. And I'm, there's nobody else in the building. It's a holiday, but they wanted to put me on the air on a day when probably if I made some mistakes, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So I'm going along, I'm trucking along, I'm getting the hang of the format, and I read something, and it was something to do with Crowley's Ridge, except I pronounced it Crowley's Ridge.
You're not the only one.
Phone rings a little bit after that, and it was our then business manager, Debbie Cross. And Debbie says, now Skeeter, she said, I know you're new to the area, but I just thought you should know it's pronounced Crowley's Ridge, not Crowley's Ridge. Thank you, Debbie, thank you. So there was that, which wasn't that bad really, but one of the fun jobs that I had early on in doing part-time radio was weekends, and it was a little station out in Hanford, California, which was about 35, 40 miles south of Fresno, and they needed a part-timer, and I managed to get on there. And one of my shifts on the weekends was Sunday afternoons from 3 to 6. I would play regular country records, the regular format. At 6 o'clock, this is in this area. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of Portuguese people, immigrants in that area. A lot of dairy farms out in that area. And this woman would come in at 6 o'clock, and her name was Mrs. Amelia Morrison. And I was told before I met her, before I started, because I was going to board op her show, I was going to run her show for her, and I was told, well, she just recently lost her husband. She's still in mourning. She dresses in black, and she was probably well into her 60s at that point, maybe even a little bit older. And said, and don't be surprised if every once in a while she'll be talking along and she'll tear up and you'll start hearing because she's talking about her husband. I didn't speak a word of Portuguese. So I'm fine. So Mrs. Morrison would come in. She would hand me a stack of records and a carbon copy of the list of songs. And of course, these are all Portuguese records, but the list was the order she wanted them played in, and all I had to do was match up the titles on the records with the title on the list, cue up the record, and she would sit behind me because the board faced a window that looked into another studio. Well, they would set up this little card table for her to sit at behind me, and she read her commercials live, and she had her sponsors because it was block programming, it was barter programming. She paid for the hour or whatever it was, hour and a half actually. And then she would sell her commercials to the local sponsors, and so I would sit there and I would queue up her records, and she would always start her show with we had this pre-recorded introduction for her, and Marv Sawyer, I don't know how I remember that name, but I do. He was the engineer at the station, but he also did a little bit of announcing, and he did this. It was the Stars and Stripes Forever was the music underneath. It says, welcome to Echoes of the Valley with your host, Mrs. Amelia Morrison. And now, here's Mrs. Amelia Morrison. And the music would fade out, and I'd turn her microphone on, and I was still going by my real name in those days, Tim, and she'd say, good evening, Tim. How are you this evening? And I'd say, I'm doing great, Mrs. Morrison. How are you? She'd say, "That's fine. Are you ready for our 90 minutes of music and words in Portuguese?" And I'm like, "You betcha. Go. Let's go." And from that point on, she'd take off, and it was nothing but Portuguese until the end of the show when she would say, "Tim, thank you very much for helping out tonight." And "You bet, Mrs. Morrison. We'll be back next week," you know, and then I'd then play the recorded close. "You've been listening to Echoes of the Valley." Well, it was followed by another Portuguese program. And this guy would come in, and some weeks he would do he would run his own board. So I'd get to hang out at the radio station, read Billboard, read radio and records, check the record library, see if there was anything interesting in there, and just, my job was to babysit the transmitter until this guy was done at 9 o'clock, and then we turned the transmitter off for the rest of the night until 5 a.m. Monday morning. So Tony Carvalho was his name. And one week, sometimes when Tony had something else going on, he would send over a reel of tape with his show already recorded that he'd done at his house, which, of course, you could hear dogs barking in the background, and you could hear kids and stuff. So one week, his son brought over this reel of tape and said, "Dad's not going to be able to be here, so please play his recorded show." Well, so I put the reel of tape on the tape machine that was in the studio, in the air studio, and I start playing it, and I'm trying to think. The machine in the studio only played at 7.5 or 15 inches per second. He had recorded his show on a home recorder at 3 3/4 inches per second. So it's, oh my gosh, I've got to figure out how to get this fixed in the time and run Mrs. Morrison's show. And so I'm thinking, what can I do? So I threw the reel. I said, okay, I had it. Brilliant. I thought this was brilliant, and it kind of was. I took Tony's reel into the production studio, and there was 2 reel-to-reel decks in that studio. So I ran the one deck at 7.5 inches per second, which meant it was twice the speed of what he'd recorded it. I put a blank reel on the other deck and put it at 15 inches per second. So it would record, and then when I played it back on the machine that would play it at 7.5 inches per second, it was the right speed. And I thought, God, I'm confused.
Who said DJs can't do math?
That's what that means. Holy cow.
What, IPS? You didn't know what IPS stood for? Okay. Well, there you go. And so I saved the show, basically. Because he paid for his 90 minutes, and I didn't want him to, I didn't know what I would do if I didn't have the show on and get in trouble or something. So Mrs. Morrison's show ends. I've got the reel up there, and it's at the right speed, and I'm like, for a guy who's only been in the business about this long, that was a pretty slick move there, bucko. It really was. So, but yeah.
Joey, how much longer are we going to go?
And on that note,
if somebody would just go to Sonic and get us some cheddar peppers, we'll go till 10, 11 o'clock.
Number one combo for me. Number one. Since he brought up Sunday, I'm going to bring up preachers. Okay, when I was at KDRS, me starting on Sunday mornings was a Baptist program, a Church of Christ program, a Methodist church program, a Baptist program, so on and so forth. Lots of different preachers from lots of different churches. I'm amazed that story came out of you, because I thought I'm the only one that happened to. But what they would do, some of the preachers would record their stuff at home and then bring it into the station. Well, what they recorded it on at home was one of those simple cassette decks, okay, that could be operated by power or by battery. They would record it on batteries that maybe aren't as strong. And if you play it back on electricity, you sound like you're on a stimulant. So this happened to me, and so a lady called and said, "What's going on?" I know the actual minister called. That was another story, another one. But anyway, what is going on? I recorded that correctly, and I said, "Well, apparently your batteries, I don't want to hear it." Clue. So right after that, we got a multi-speed cassette deck, and we never had that problem again.
I always felt like we were KWYA to KPCA. Y'all had a little more power, but 1956.
Now, when they first signed on, it was 250.
Okay, but it was 1956.
56.
We were 56. I always thought we were kind of on the same wavelength. Did y'all do any live stuff in the studio, church stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But now, I didn't work Sunday morning.
Were y'all segregated? We were segregated. We had African American shows in the Sunday morning,
Yeah.
and then we went to the Caucasian Methodist Church,
Yeah.
and that served as the bumper for the afternoon Caucasian programming. See?
Yeah, it was very much like that.
No, seriously. And we had live shows in the studio, and I mean it was just crazy. You would have these churches; they would bring in live bands.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and I was Methodist church, and there were things happening in that studio in there I didn't understand, you know. But Brother James Perry hosted the mornings, but every once in a while he'd have to be off, and he'd ask me to fill in for him.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes they felt like I was getting the spirit in there with them, you know. I'm serious.
Well, now it's fair to say that KWYN and KDRS AM had a lot in common. That's true, isn't it? That KW, whatever, that one.
Well, Ken Bach came
Yeah.
to KDRS as well later on, and he and my dad ran Yawn Patrol.
Yeah, there you go. Forever. But they did back fence, they did trading times, all those kind of similar things.
Show. I
Yeah.
sure do.
And so, you talking about your situation, I didn't know we had that much in common. So we're playing classic gospel, like Tommy's talking about. What did he say? Your grandmother's gospel or whatever? That's what we were supposed to be playing, yeah. So I'm pouring through our albums, and I come across this album, From the Mighty Clouds of Joy. Oh, my goodness. And I was looking at it, and you know what I was looking for? I was looking for song times. And they had a song called Jesus Will Save Your Soul. And that was the only words in that song for 6.5 minutes. Now, it was great. Jesus, oh, Jesus, oh, Jesus, Jesus will save your soul. You know, take it, Jesus. You know, so I'm proud of myself. So Monday morning, the aforementioned Wilma Wheeler said, Brian, we don't play music from that genre. She was very polite about it. And I said, well, it's gospel music, isn't it? Yeah, but it's not traditional Southern gospel. And I said, well, it sure sounded like it to me. But I didn't get fired, though. But again, I was similar situations.
You were just ahead of your time.
Well, no, I would never, ever say that. Well, there you go. Does anybody have any questions out there? Other than when are we going to leave?
Yeah.
We got to eat. Oh, hey, it's been great. Hey, it's time to eat. So,
I just want to say I have so much respect for everybody up here. I mean, Marty, my connection to Marty started long before even I knew Marty, because he and my wife went to school together at Murray State. And Dennis, if it hadn't been for Dennis, I'd probably still be in Mark Tree, because I couldn't leave. I mean, I was in Mark Tree, and I had a chance for a job at KBTA in Batesville as a news director. And I went up there, paid my power deposit and everything, and chickened out.
Well, you were 21 when you came to KNEA.
Well, and that's the other time. I went to KDA at 21, stayed about 6 months with Dennis and Bill and that crew, but I chickened out and went back to Mark Tree. You remember?
Actually, you hit the rewind button on that. I only worked with you for about this long at KNEA because I was going to KAIT.
That's right.
To do sales. You were the incoming station manager taking my job.
Well,
and doing mornings with Ronnie.
but Dennis,
the Rooster.
Ronnie the Rooster, buddy. But Dennis is the one that recommended to that board that they call me,
I
and
immediately thought of you.
he got me out of Mark Tree, or I might still be there.
Remember, you didn't want to come.
I know. I'm scared. So you're a big chicken. I am a big chicken.
Trey really didn't want to come. I called him and I said, look, I've got an opportunity, the second offer from KAIT. They want me in sales, and I'm going to take it for the money, you know, because I wasn't making a whole bunch of money at KNEA, although I was doing sales and managing. And I said, you're perfect for this job, Trey. You're 21 years old. And he said, I'm too young, Rohair, I'm too young. And I said, no, you're not. You need to move to a bigger market because KPCA is not going to last, you know, and you knew that at the time. So he did. Thank God he came over, and then the rest is history. It's all right there. Hey, you're more than welcome, my brother. I love it. I love what you've done.
Well, this has been fun.
It has been a
It has been fun.
Thank you.